Thank you so much, Kyle, and thank you to the M&A Network. For those of you who are not familiar with the network, it's a tremendous resource, and they're building more and more resources to try and support the environment and the community who supports individuals going through the M&A process. So, a little bit about myself is I started in the IT world over 35, maybe 40 years ago as an 8-year-old, and I've been in IT ever since. I was hands-on technologist, became a business strategist, and ultimately a CIO and a CTO for different size companies. I've had industry experience, consulting experience. I've published this book on marketing, which has nothing to do with technology, but everything to do with technology, right? And so my business is rather extensive when it comes to the IT world and even the business world. What most people don't realize is that IT is a significant impact on the M&A process. 75% of executive managers underestimate the role of IT to their M&A success. I mean, that's a tremendous number. That's 2/3. And at the same time, 40% of professionals place the M&A failure directly on the post-merger integration processes that happen within IT. And that's also a rather large number. And then there was a third study that identified that only 50% of management who was involved in M&A processes actually included them in the process pre-integration, post-merger, whereas almost everybody included finance, right? Because oftentimes when we think about the M&A process, we think of it as a business process. It's one business buying another business. But IT integration is oftentimes one of the largest expenses that is involved in a merger or acquisition. IT integration can cost between 45 to 60% of the entire integration budget, as was found by a particular study. And at the same time, 20% of companies don't budget enough. I actually was involved in a IT due diligence process where it was being performed by a private equity firm, and the PE firm basically said, hey, you know what? We're going to handle the risk associated with the IT integration by just doubling the combined budget of both departments. And that's how we're going to manage the post-integration due diligence, dealing with none of the risks that were in there and that are involved in IT integration, but looking at it just as a financial issue, which is unfortunately not necessarily the case. There's also reputational risk that's involved in that as well. And that's not only external, that's internal within the employees. So 20% of companies don't budget enough for the post M&A integration, or they decide just to double budgets to try and make it easy. And most people, for the reason for this is that most people don't realize that an IT integration can easily cost about $10,000 per employee for the integration. So that's just the integration cost. That's not associated with everything else that's tied to maintaining the IT infrastructure. So the risk and the impact on the organizations is pretty significant. And the reason for this is because the process to integrate IT is so complex, right? I'll talk about it a little later as to why we don't often think about it, because IT is often hidden, right? But the process for integrating IT actually mirrors the standard process for any M&A process that we go through, right? We have the due diligence process, we have the pre-integration planning, launch, ultimately the development of a roadmap, and then ultimately the integration occurs. And the negatives that can occur besides M&A failure, which can ultimately result in the business failure, is that there's disruption to the business, there's customer service issues, there's loss of revenue, there's increased costs, there's actually increased litigation liability, as well as the possibility of completely losing your entire infrastructure and operational components. So what does that look like? Well, are in some software vendor clauses, there is a clause that says you cannot transfer your license to another party. And in an M&A process, that can create a problem if the software, or if the purpose of the M&A, or one of the outcomes of the M&A, is that that software will be operating the new entity. If that new entity now loses the ability based upon the licensing agreement, they have a significant risk, and not only liability, but also the negotiation leverage that they have potentially lost because they've already committed themselves to something. So there are significant impacts that occur because IT is so tightly integrated with the organization. When it comes to IT, unfortunately, IT is often the last thing people think of. And those of you who have been in large enough firms will know, and may have been on either side of this process, where IT is brought into the last minute because software has been purchased or hardware has been purchased, and someone says, oh, we need to integrate your Active Directory, or we need to expose some ports on your firewall, or we need this, or we need that. And then it's like, oh, okay, let's call the IT department. And you call up the IT department, and the IT department is like, huh? What do you mean? We know nothing about this. No one told us about this. You've been negotiating this for the past 6 months. You didn't ask us about the cybersecurity risks. You didn't ask us about how we're going to address this, whether this fits within our data governance issue, right? There are so many different things, and I'll show you how many so it becomes really concrete. But, you know, one of the things that people don't realize is that IT cannot move quickly. And the reason why IT cannot move quickly is because we touch the entire organization, and because we are focused on trying to ameliorate and mitigate as much risk as possible. To give you an idea of that, you know, this is just a standard slide. There's a lot of information that's packed on this slide, but the idea here really is that the further out you go in the time from the M&A announcement that IT is brought in, the more risk there is. And if we can get started early on, we can really lower that risk. Whereas if IT is included at the end, it becomes a really higher level of risk. And the reason for this is because IT is based upon information, and your business rests on the information. I know this looks like an hourglass. It was really meant to be two triangles, one triangle balancing on the other. But the idea is that the information is what drives your business. That's what ultimately keeps your business operational. And if your ability to access that information fails, then your business will crash. You won't be able to maintain this balance. And it affects, on the left, all the stakeholders that are associated, and on the right, it affects all the different business processes and capabilities of your organization. And that's because IT is what is supporting your organization. It's information technology. To give you an idea, this periodic table of IT processes, there are 9 separate domains that are listed here, and there are 45 core processes that are identified. So when you think about IT, you often think about it as just a single block or a single unit. Maybe it's just the individuals you touch. It might just be the help desk to you, might be the phone number, someone on the other end. But there are 45 processes that are occurring underneath the hood of IT in order to drive IT. And these processes are defined through best practices that have been established by the information technology industry in order to best service and track the governance associated with that. For smaller firms, we don't use necessarily the full 9 and the full 45. So at Triangular Consulting, when we look at it, it's got to be right sized, right? So it doesn't make sense for us to handle a small $100 million transaction the same way we would handle a $100 billion transaction, right? The level of complexity differs. We need to touch the same pieces, but because the organization differs, we look at it from a different perspective. When we think about M&A, and we think about IT, oftentimes what we think about is the technology, and that's really what I've been talking about. But when in the IT world, what we're thinking about is people, process, technology, and more recently, we've been including data. You'll see data here is listed under technology, but data is becoming much more prevalent in being a whole nother pillar, a whole nother silo that needs to be addressed. Particularly as you're merging two different companies, or as you're trying to build some kind of a relationship between them to take that data across and make it actionable. Sometimes the data is what you're buying, right? Well, and so if you can't gain access to that data, or you can't integrate that data, then the purchase becomes a lot less strategic. And let's be honest, IT is oftentimes not an IT problem, right? Friction in the IT world often is tied to issues within the business processes or the workflows, right? IT just mimics that. IT can create a lot of friction for your organization. They could be non-responsive. The technology might not fit. They might not be innovative enough. There are many reasons why IT might not be able to support the organization and create friction. But ultimately, if the organization itself has internal friction with their business processes and their workflows, IT can only do so much. And what you'll often see is in a very innovative organization, the CIO is often the person who is leading the innovation, because it's seen as a technology, as digital transformation, as opposed to, say, business transformation. So the thing that we need to think about as we're thinking about technology in an M&A process is, how can technology facilitate that process? This is just, there are two slides here. I'm not going to go into the details, but this just gives you a quick idea of the many different things that we need to look at when we're trying to figure out how to bring two different organizations together. And how we do that. What are the different criteria that we're looking at, whether it's feasibility or operationally or anything else that's tied to that. So there's a significant number of criteria that we are looking for and evaluating on. In order to do this, within Triangular Consulting, we leverage standardized and aligned assessments. And this is a list of the various different assessment tools that we actually have developed and that we leverage through our partners. Many of these tools are conducted through surveys. Oftentimes they're done through workshops. We like to see them done on both sides of the transaction, and then we bring them together to the steering committee in order to evaluate not just the way one organization looks versus the other organization, but the way they would look together, so we can make some real strategic decisions, so we can avoid some of those pain points and the failures that I identified earlier on in the solution. To give you an idea of what one of those might look like, we've actually put together an offer for everybody on this call. We will, for a limited time, I'll talk to Kyle about how long, but let's say just the next 30 days. If you guys want to sign up, we can do a free business vision diagnostic for your organization or one of your customers. You just want to come into, and I'll give you the link for this, but basically what it does is it will allow you to identify stakeholder satisfaction, which is really the single number one measure of IT efficacy, right? And we can help you address, I can go into greater details about it, but it will measure your organization across 9 different categories and give you examples of feedback that are provided by the individuals who have taken the survey for your organization. With that said, I'd like to thank you for the time. I think I've come in just under 15 minutes. You can see the link is here, and again, I'll put that in the thing. You can go in and see that webpage. And I'd again like to thank the M&A Network. I'd like to thank everybody here, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you guys may have. Thank you for the time.